He's one of the most influential thinkers and educators in the world, and has shown himself to have the unique ability to synthesize and communicate both the perils and the promise of how we are educated and what it means to every single one of us. Live from Liverpool, Sir Ken Robinson.
Well, thank you, Alan. And I know you can hear me because I can hear myself. It's a great irony, isn't it, that I live in Los Angeles. And when you told me about this remarkable center that you're establishing, I was absolutely delighted to be asked to come along and say some words of introduction, confident that I would simply be on the 405 for about, well, 2 days or more to get from Westwood, and be among you. And as circumstances fell out, as Alan said, I happen to be in England now, in Liverpool, which is where I'm from originally. So I wanted firstly to apologise personally for not being there in the flesh, as it were. I really hoped I would be and assured Alan that I would be. And I want to thank Alan, not only for the vision he brings to the centre, but for his graciousness and understanding about my not, in the end, being able to join you, as it were, in the room for this breakfast. But I was very keen to be part of this. I'm a great fan of USC. My son was a student at USC. And I think the work of the centre is important in almost every way. It's about engagement. It's also about collaboration among disciplines at USC. But it's also, as Dean Gallagher has said in describing the centre, about forging connections between home, school and the community. And that, I think, is one of the great challenges that faces every education system currently. As it's fallen out, I'm absolutely thrilled to be speaking to you from LIPA. You may see a photograph come up in just a minute of LIPA. This is the Institute for Performing Arts, which was established in 1995. And we're sitting here in the school that Paul McCartney attended as a student in high school. And the school was actually founded by Paul McCartney and Mark Featherstone Whitty, who is the chief executive. They both are. And they have done, Mark particularly has done absolutely remarkable work in taking what was a derelict building and turning it into what is one of the most effective, best respected, and I think all round one of the most important conservatoires for the performing arts in Europe. I'd push a bit further than that myself, but I'll settle for Europe for now. But look, let me just say a couple of words about why I think the school is so important. One of them is that it is in Paul McCartney's old high school. I went to school in Liverpool across the city centre, about 2 miles away. I went to a school called the Collegiate. And both schools ceased functioning as high schools, I think, in the 70s. Paul and Mark came to the school when it was empty and derelict and had the vision to turn it into this remarkable centre for education and training. My old school burnt down. I'm just saying, you can draw your own conclusions. But I remember talking here, I interviewed Paul McCartney for a book I wrote called The Element, and I asked him if he had enjoyed music at school. And he said he hadn't. And I said, did your music teacher think you had any talent in music? And he said, no, he didn't. Well, he does, doesn't he? And one of the other people on the same music program, 2 years younger than him, was George Harrison, the lead guitarist of the Beatles. And apparently his music teacher didn't think that George had any musical talent either. So I said, well, look, would this be a reasonable observation that there was this one music teacher in Liverpool in the late 1950s who had half the Beatles in his class and he missed it? And he said, well, that's right. Well, it's a bit of an oversight, isn't it, frankly? And the reason I mention this is because I think the key to engagement in education is to take a more generous, compassionate, and expansive view of human talent and human interest in the world around us. That there are problems inherent in our current education systems, which themselves are responsible for creating the disengagement that we're now concerned about. It's the system that creates the problem. It's not the students. And so we shouldn't be trying to fix students. We should be trying to fix the system. Human resources, I mean, it's a slightly odd phrase, I think, but it serves the purpose here. As I see it, are like the world's natural resources in several respects. One is that they are very diverse. The second is that they're often hidden from view. You have to search for them and dig them up often. They're not just lying around on the surface, visible to anybody. And thirdly, even if you discover them, you have to refine them and develop them and turn them into something. That should be the business of education, but too often it isn't. And I want to say why that is. But I do think the work of the centre or that the conception of the centre is very well positioned to tackle these issues. And Alan and Dean Gallagher, I'm sure, will be the first to recognise that there are many others in the field now who are trying to address these issues of engagement and of equity, which is the second great founding principle of EDGE, and that there's a network here that they can both work with and I hope give leadership to and help to galvanise. Well, look, what's the problem? How would you judge the impact of an education system? If we want to improve it, what is it exactly that we're trying to improve? What are the outcomes that we think are proper to an education system? Well, there would be some easy ones to spot. One is you would hope that students in the system would enjoy being in it, wouldn't you? You'd hope that they'd be excited about learning. You hope that they would turn up for the day enthusiastic and wanting to learn and leave at the end of the day looking forward to the next one. So it's worth asking whether that happens often enough. The second is you would expect there to be a very, very high rate of success from the system, a high rate of graduation. Well, again, that would be a harsh test for many schools in the US. And I say this, as I say, as a resident of the United States. I ought to point out, incidentally, that I have lived in Los Angeles now for 17 years. We came over to LA in 2001. And I have a green card. I wish to point this out. I'm not just jumping on the internet here to take a few shots at the system. I have a green card. I'm invested in California, in Los Angeles. I'm officially an alien, incidentally. I'm a resident alien. So thank you for that. And yet I move among you, undetected. Actually, I've recently applied for citizenship. I might have picked a better time to do that. We'll find out. But there are problems, as you know, across the American education system of low graduation rates. I mean, it depends where you look, but on average, about 20% of people who start the 9th grade in American high schools don't complete the 10th grade. So graduation rates might be another marker. Overall well-being, you'd expect students to be happy and to feel fulfilled across a wide range of spectra, physically and emotionally and socially. How well does our system do that? You would expect, wouldn't you, that the result of an effective education system would be a positive contribution to a buoyant economy and the sort of economies that young people are moving to become part of. You would expect, wouldn't you, that education would contribute to cultural understanding and cultural vitality in our communities. And you'd expect also that education would contribute to positive engagement in our social institutions, in our voting patterns, in the coherence and cogency of our political systems. Well, I think we would question whether our current systems are doing that very effectively. You know, Alan earlier mentioned John Dewey, and John Dewey once said that every generation has to rediscover democracy. I think that's true, and you only have to look at the most recent elections, not just in America, but on this side of the Atlantic, to recognize that many young people are simply not interested in these democratic processes in the way that we thought they might be. So there are some markers for why would we consider an education system to be successful. I don't think on most of those we could claim that many public systems of education around the world, not just in America, by the way, but in Europe as well, we could claim to be as successful as we would like them to be. In fact, on the contrary, here's the problem. There's a distinction always to make between symptoms and causes. I want to talk about the causes in just a minute, but just in terms of symptoms, there is a very high rate of non-graduation in our high schools in America. Let me focus on those. I dislike the term dropout, and I would rather not use it because if you call somebody a dropout, it rather sounds, doesn't it, as if they have failed the system. I think if you've got over 20% of young people, sometimes 30, sometimes 40 in some of our inner city districts, not completing high school, I think it's a bit brash to say that they have failed the system. I think at that point you've got to say the system failed them. If you were running a business and you lost 30% of your customers every year, Now, you might wonder whether it was these stupid customers or your business plan. And I believe that the problem lies not in the students, as I say, but in the system itself. The system creates the problem. And we need to understand that if we're going to solve the problem. Beyond people who don't graduate, there is a massive undertow of people who just aren't interested. You'll be getting some figures during the course of the morning on the levels of engagement and disengagement, and they are really very daunting to recognize how many people turn up at school and just go along with it, but aren't especially interested in it and are playing the game to get through it. And then there's a third factor, which the best way I can think of it is dissonance. That's to say, a division, a separation between what goes on in schools and what goes on in the world around schools. For example, there is a big movement at the moment to reform schools by raising standards. On the whole, it's failing to promote the very capabilities in the economy that most businesses now say they want, including creativity, collaboration, cooperation, and communication skills. In Davos recently, the leaders of the World Economic Forum published a report calling on education systems to promote these very capabilities, but most of our systems simply don't. Which is ironic to me, because most governments are imposing on schools systems of education which are meant to be beneficial to the economy, and most businesses take the opposite view. In fact, many businesses these days aren't terribly concerned about whether students coming through the system have got degrees, for example, and often complain they lack the very qualities they're looking for. So there's a dissonance there. There's clearly a dissonance between what's going on in schools and the broader culture. Alan mentioned the impact of digital technology, and this is causing all kinds of anxieties and stresses and strains for young people as well as for adults. But this revolution in digital technology hasn't ended, it's hardly started. The revolution in artificial intelligence, which is heading our way just now, if we're to believe those who are on top of the literature and within the fields of research, is going to absolutely dwarf everything that's happened in the past 15, 20 years. I've no doubt at all that my daughter Adeline, who is 2 weeks old, well, as of yesterday, along with other children who were born this year, will be looking back at pictures of you 30 years from now with patronizing smiles. And they'll be pointing to these iPods and iPads and iPhones that you're currently holding, and we feel are so sophisticated and the kind of last word of technological evolution, and wonder how you coped. They were saying really it was like a thing, that you carried it around in your hand and you had to press it. I mean, how was that? And touch it with your fingers, like gross. So these revolutions haven't stopped. They've hardly started. You combine that with the rate of environmental change and population growth, and we have a very serious, even I would venture to say, a series of existential issues on our hands that education has to engage in. But these are all symptoms. The non-graduation rates, levels of disengagement, of dissonance, of stress and anxiety, they're not the causes. They're the outfall. The causes, I think, really lie deep in the ideology of our current education systems, which were evolved, it's worth remembering, in the mid-19th century to meet the needs of a different world. I can summarize it quickly. I think the problems are to do with rituals, resources and relevance. But the best way I can put it is that for most education systems in the past 15, 20 years, this has been a time of constant government intervention. Governments all around the world have been trying to improve education, largely for economic reasons, and they've adopted a set of similar strategies. A good friend of mine, Pasi Sahlberg, refers to this as the Global Education Reform Movement, or GERM for short, and it certainly seems to have been contagious. There are several elements of this particular strategy for school improvement. They've all proved to be catastrophic, but it's worth mentioning them. The first is the systems of reform are based on the imposition of ideas of conformity. I don't mean conformity in the sense of people behaving well and looking after each other and living orderly lives. I mean that they're based on a stereotype of human intelligence, and I think the provost would agree with this, that there is very much more to human intelligence than to the expansive capabilities of the human mind than those specific abilities that are required to do academic work or to get academic degrees. And yet we have education systems predicated on a very narrow conception of intelligence. And the consequence of this narrow view of ability is we generate a very large conception of inability or disability. If we expand our conception of ability in the first place, a lot of the problems the system causes tend to dissipate. The real signature of human life is not conformity. I mean, in terms of our capabilities, it's diversity. It's the exact opposite. And I think if we're to be serious about engagement, we have to understand and promote and implement conceptions of diversity, not just in culture, but of capability, of outlook, of disposition, and of temperament. The second is that our systems are based on the idea of compliance. You know, when No Child Left Behind became law, the government, with all its good intentions, it was a cross-party piece of legislation, concluded the best way to raise standards in schools was to standardize everything and to introduce a regular and what proved to be a ubiquitous process of testing. What they didn't do was provide a system. They opened that to the market, and this has proved to be a multi-billion-dollar business. It's been an absolute bonanza for the publishing companies and the testing companies, and it's been a great success for them, but a catastrophe for education on the whole. And I say this because of these disastrous figures we see for engagement, for non-graduation, and for dissonance. These systems around the world are failing in the very terms in which they were conceived. For example, in America, the great hope was that more and more testing would lead to an improvement in international league tables in mathematics, science, and languages. It's actually had no such effect. It's been a multi-billion-dollar failed experiment. And I agree with the provost. Innovation depends on failure, but you have to recognize when a failure has become a disaster. And the third is that our systems are based on linearity. This is a fiction in human life, as you know. I can't see you now, but you can see each other. Can I ask you to put your hands up if you are doing now with your life exactly what you thought you'd be doing when you were 15? Not so many, is it? Now, I mean, you may be working in a field you had in mind. You may have thought, well, I want to be a neuroscientist. I do want to be an educator. I do want to be a business leader. But most people don't have that conception when they're young. And even if they do, the lives you go on to lead are entirely and inherently unpredictable. And the reason is you create your life as you live it. Human life is a constant process of improvisation. It's a kind of conversation between whether or not you discover your inner talents and the opportunities around you and whether you take them or you move away from them. But the consequence is that every human life is different, unique, and unrepeatable. My daughter Adeline is like me. It's like her mum and her father. It's like other members of our family, like my wife. But she's not a clone of any of us, any more than you're a clone of your parents. Every human life charts a distinct course. And the course you chart has everything to do with whether or not you discover what's within you as well as what's around you. It's an organic process, not a linear one. And yet our education systems are predicated on linear conceptions of supply and demand. Now, the reason I'm saying all this is that the consequence of it is that we create disengagement. And we're not going to solve the problems of engagement if we double down on the current system and work from the assumption it's the children that we have to fix. What we have to do is create the conditions under which they would want to learn. And this is what I just want to come to. One of the themes that Alan properly talks about is the need to get back to basics. The basics are not a set of subjects, and he, I know, takes this view as well. The basics are the purposes of education and also what it is to be a human being and how human beings grow and evolve. I want to show a very quick video here. I mean, it is quick. It's about 30 seconds. Let me explain what it is. It's not a puzzle, but it's better to know what's coming so you can appreciate it. Basically, it's a short video off YouTube, and it's a toddler. His parents give him a present, and it's a banana. That's it. Just check his reaction to this banana. Matt, can you play the video?
Open it. You're gonna bring it home? What do you say?
Thank you. I got the banana.
I love that. You know, I really think we should take another look at bananas, don't you? I think we're taking them for granted. I mean, that joyous enthusiasm for discovering the world, it's a wonderful thing to see, and all babies have that. I mean, it tones down, obviously. It as well, it does tone down. I mean, you wouldn't want that going on in Ralph's every day of the week, you know, or you know, when you go to Whole Foods, you don't want people going around crazed, waving bananas around as if they've never seen one. I mean, restaurants would be an entirely different experience, wouldn't it, if we didn't tone this down a little bit? But the point is that children, and this is where we have to start, this is where the basics begin. Young children are learning organisms. They love to learn. They are driven by a kind of furious curiosity about the world around them. Think what they do in the first couple of years of life. Most kids learn to speak. I mean, that's a fantastic achievement when you think about it. And the interesting thing about it is that nobody teaches them how to do it. Children learn to speak because they want to and they can. They absorb it through their skin in the way they absorb all kinds of behaviors, understanding about people's reactions to them, how the world operates. Nobody teaches them it. And the reason you don't teach them, you know, if you're a parent, you didn't teach your child to speak, and you know why. It's because you don't know how you do it either. And even if you did, you can't instruct somebody in speech. You know, there isn't a point, is there, where you sit your child down at the age of 18 months and say, look, we need to talk. Or more specifically, you do. And this is how this is going to work. You probably noticed your father and I making all these noises the past 18 months, and I know it's all rather baffling, but some of these noises mean things. We call them nouns. They're the names of things, and there'll be about 5,000 of them you'll need to pick up. Some of these noises we make are not the names of things. They're the names of things we do with things. We call them verbs, and there'll be about another 4,000 of those. And by the way, if you alter the tone of your voice at the end of the word, you can indicate whether you have done something or whether you're about to do something. And don't worry about the subjunctive. Honestly, nobody gets it. So, you know, you don't do that. Children learn through their skin. But here's the thing. There is a difference between learning, education, and school. Kids love to learn. They don't all get on with education, and some have a hard time with school. Here's the difference. Learning is a natural process of acquiring new skills and understanding, and we do that naturally, voraciously, and continuously throughout most of our lives. Education is a more intentional process of learning, and the reason we have education systems is because there are things we believe as a culture that it's important that children learn that aren't left to chance. That's why we have a curriculum. There are some things that we believe are important to learn which are too difficult, in our view, for people to learn on their own. For calculus, for example, it's very unlikely, even with the best discovery methods, that most kids would stumble across calculus on their own, given that only 2 human beings in the history of humanity ever did. So there are some things that we feel it's important to teach people to save a bit of time, or because they're too complex. But the thing is that, which is why we have pedagogy and teaching. And some things in education are hard to come by, and some things are difficult to learn, and so some people do have difficulty with that. But they also have difficulty with the way we do education, with the compliance, the conformity, and the linearity, which actually inhibits the natural process of teaching and learning, which impel children if they're left to their own devices. A school, properly conceived, is a community of learners. I think that's the best way to think of it. It's a community of learners. And I'm all for schools. I have no arguments for the dissolution of schools. But we do have to reimagine what a school is. The reason schools matter is because most of what we learn from each other. Even people who live alone absorb the culture around them. You don't learn to speak the Spanish spontaneously if you happen to live in some remote part of Norway. You learn from the culture. And all of us are heir to the vast complexities and great treasures of human culture and history. So a school is a place where people come together to learn. The problem is we've come to do schools in a particular way, and we've come to conceive of education systems in particular ways as well. So the task is to reimagine school. So on what basis would we do it? Let me just conclude with this. There are, I think, 3 big purposes that we have to consider, or 3 main principles to consider when we come to look at issues of engagement. The first is we have to personalize education. Now, it seems odd to have to say that, but the fact is every human being is different. They have unique capacities, they have unique dispositions and unique temperaments. I wrote about this a while ago in a book called The Element. Education is not an impersonal process. It's about the growth and development of living human beings and individuals. Over the course of their lives, babies from birth, and in fact some good way beyond that, go through the most remarkable metamorphosis. They develop cognitively, in their understanding, they develop emotionally, they develop socially, they develop physically, they develop spiritually. How they develop and whether they develop has everything to do with their nature, how they are born, who they are born as, their inherent capabilities and dispositions. It has an equal amount to do with the opportunities and circumstances in which they're grown and develop. That's why I'm saying a lot of human capabilities are hidden beneath the surface. We have to discover them and we have to refine them. That's the proper job of not just education, but education in concert with the home and the community, which is why Dean Gallagher's point about that triad is so important. So it has to be personalised. That has implications for the curriculum and it has implications for teaching and learning. It has to be customised, secondly, to circumstances that children are actually living in. There's no good reason why an education system, a school in one part of LA Unified School District, should be exactly the same sort of place, even aspirationally, as a school in the southern tip of Florida. People are living different lives in different circumstances with different challenges. Yes, there are things we need to learn in common, but we also need to customize it to the circumstances and particular challenges of our culture. How do we do that? We do it by investing in the one thing that governments have failed to invest in America. There are three big bits to education. There's the curriculum, there's pedagogy and assessment. Governments have placed a mistaken bet on the idea that we can improve education by standardizing the curriculum and by investing in assessment. The only thing that has ever made a difference in improving engagement, in therefore raising standards, in deepening the pleasure, enjoyment and achievement of young people in education, the only thing that ever works is teaching. Every school system in the world that is successful has invested in its teachers. It's true here in LIPA. This institution couldn't work without the quality of the teachers who work here, working in concert with the students, not being didactic towards them, but engaging with them. Engagement is a relationship, and the crucial relationship is between the discipline, the teacher, and the student. You know, teaching is not properly conceived a one-way traffic. I did an event a few years ago with the Dalai Lama. I just think you should know this. And this is who you're dealing with. And I remember the Dalai Lama was asked the question, and he paused for a long time and he said, "I don't know. What do you think?" It was a beautiful way to put it because it illustrates that teaching is a conversation, not a monologue. Our students have much to teach us and we have much to learn from them, as well as vice versa. Every school system that works, every institution that's great and is achieving great things, invests in the quality and the respect and the professional development of its teachers. Yes, we need a curriculum. Yes, we need supportive, informative, descriptive and illuminative systems of assessment. But unless we focus on what really matters at the heart of engagement, all these things will simply report more eloquently on the failures that we're perpetrating. And the third big principle is purpose. Why are we doing all of this? Well, as we face a rapidly changing world, I think the core to this is we have to help young people discover the world inside them and the world around them for economic, social, cultural and personal purposes. I've tried to set some of these things out in a book I've just published for parents. It predates me becoming a grandparent. I was going to write it anyway, but I'm going to go and read it now. I've written it. It's called You, Your Child and School. Parents are partners in this process, as Dean Gallagher has indicated. We can't step outside the community and the homes which our children are part of. Education has a duty of care to be more actively engaged in them. The final thing, and it is the final thing I want to say, is this, that we also have to rethink the narrative of education. We have lived for too long with the idea that the whole purpose of primary school is to fit people for secondary school, and the whole purpose of secondary school is to prepare people to go to college. You know, colleges are well and good. USC is a great college, but people don't have to go to university to have a life. On the contrary, this is a busted flush. I've worked in universities. I'm not against universities. I like academic work. I have a PhD. I write books. But not everybody needs this process. Not everybody benefits from it. And the consequence, by the way, is that we're pumping people through into higher education who don't want to be there and who have no idea what they're going to do when they leave, and they're leaving with a mountain of debt. Along the way, we're actually disparaging all sorts of other routes into fulfilling lives and vibrant communities and healthy economies in the vocational sector, in the technical sector. We're deferring all of these opportunities for this kind of unfulfilled promise of a university degree. I think that has to be on our agenda for this discussion. While graduates are going unemployed and underemployed all around the world, hundreds of thousands of jobs in America in technical and vocational trades are neglected because people are being discouraged from applying for them because it's seen as second rate. This narrative of academic and vocational is part of the deficit of having a narrow view of intelligence to begin with. So thank you for this invitation. Thank you to Alan for asking me to be part of it. My repeated apologies for not being with you in the room. My thanks to Lipper again for making it possible for me to be with you at all. I honestly was thrilled to do this because there is no other conversation that matters more in education than how we engage the students who we're meant to be serving. And it isn't about improving what we do now, it's about reimagining what we do now and putting it onto a different track. So I think today's conversations are deeply important, particularly for a massive complex system like LAUSD, for this wonderful city of Los Angeles with its great network of communities and cultures and economic opportunities. And it's the historic role of a great university like this to be at the center of the intellectual regeneration of that community. So thank you for the invitation. My best wishes for the conversations that lie ahead. And I look forward to being more involved in them when I eventually get back to Los Angeles. Thank you.